The whole town of Dust Hollow turned out for the wedding, for the wrong reason. They did not come because it was romantic. They came because it was strange. A Chinese widow in a borrowed blue dress, a limping horse trader with one boot braced stiff and a walnut cane under his palm, and half the frontier standing in the sun waiting to see which one of them would break first. By noon the boardwalks were shimmering with heat. Flies circled the hitching rails. A piano from the saloon drifted through the street, cheerful in exactly the wrong way. Men in dust-coated hats pretended they had business nearby. Women whispered behind their gloves. Even the children knew this was no blessing. This was a spectacle. Elias Hart felt every stare like a thumb pressed into a bruise. Once the range had trusted him without question. Then a stallion threw him into Canyon Stone and ruined his hip and knee. He could still work, still bargain, still read weather, still calm a half-mad horse with his voice. But not one person in that crowd was looking at what he could still do. They were looking at what he could not. Across from him stood Lin Tran, quiet, steady, black hair pinned clean at the nape, needle-calloused hands folded in front of a borrowed dress. Dust Hollow knew the easy version of her story. Chinese, widow, new in town, someone else's problem. The truth was harder. She had crossed an ocean as a girl on promises of safety and found debt instead, labor instead, marriage instead. When her husband died in a freight accident outside Carson Pass, he left behind unpaid notes, no children, and one widow the town suddenly wanted handled. So the arrangement was made, not by love, not by courtship, by pressure, paperwork, and the soft, respectable language people use when they want control to sound like kindness. A voice in the crowd muttered, "This won't last till winter." Elias heard it. Lin heard it too. He leaned slightly on his cane. "I'm sorry they made a show of you." She met his eyes for the first time. They made a show of both of us. That was the first honest thing spoken all morning. The ceremony was over in minutes. A signature, a ring, a few dry vows swallowed by heat. Then Elias offered his arm, not softly, not possessive, just enough room for her to refuse. Lin looked at the crowd, looked at him, and placed her hand there, like a decision. The ranch sat outside town where the fences had started losing arguments with time. A low house, a weathered barn, a tack shed, a field so dry it looked like rain had forgotten it. Inside, the place was clean in the way lonely houses become clean. Not warm, not lived in, just held together. Lin noticed the split buckets, the patched roof, the cloth folded on a shelf. "You expected worse," Elias said. "I expected nothing." A beat later, he told her she could take the east room, leak less there. But shame was quicker than trust. "You'd rather keep me out of sight?" she asked. Elias turned. "What?" "The room in the back," she said, "for the woman who is useful on paper." He stared at her, then answered carefully. "No, the east room, because the roof leaks less. That night they ate lamb stew, too salty from reduction, and biscuits too hard from distraction. "I know it's plain," Elias said. Lynn took another bite. "It is not plain. It is determined." He laughed before he meant to. Small, real, alive. And for the first time that day, the silence in the house did not feel empty. It felt unfamiliar. Over the next week, Dust Hollow followed them everywhere. At Mercer's Dry Goods, talk thinned when Lynn walked in. At the pump, women answered her with silence. At the farrier, men spoke about Elias like he wasn't standing there. "Pride don't pull water," one of them said. "And she?" another muttered. "She even know this country?" They pretended not to care. They were both lying. At home, the strain leaked into foolish things. He offered to carry a crate she had already lifted. She thought he was correcting her. She reached for the account book. He thought she was checking his sums. He asked whether she knew how to salt pork for storage. She heard doubt in the question. She suggested rice, ginger, dried scallion for the market list. He blinked. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "My kitchen has been a sad place longer than I realized." That won him a smile. The first real turn came over thread. Lynn found an old saddle blanket split nearly through at the seam and repaired it so cleanly Elias ran his thumb over the mend twice. "That'll hold?" he asked. "It will hold longer because it tore once." He looked up at her then, not at the widow, at the craft. By the end of the week she had mended grain sacks, altered one of his work shirts so it no longer pulled at his injured side, and reorganized the pantry with the ruthless logic of someone who had spent years making too little last longer. In return, Elias showed her the ranch the way a man shows someone a language he never expected another person to learn. Which mare kicked when frightened? Which one only threatened? How to smell when the creek had dropped too low? How to watch a horse's flank and know sickness was coming before the animal admitted it. "You see before you move," Lynn told him. "I have to," he said. Then the creek fell another inch. By mid-July, the ranch was in trouble. The bean rows curled at the edges. Feed prices climbed. 2 buyers delayed payment. The field hardened into cracked dust. One evening Elias stood by the ditch, cane sunk in dry mud. "If we lose another week of water," he said, "we start selling stock cheap." "And after that?" Lynn asked. He took too long to answer. "After that, we lose the ranch one piece at a time." She looked over the field. "We can dig a holding trench." Too shallow. Then barrels. Not enough lift. Then a wheel. He turned to her. "A water wheel?" "A small one," she said, "at the bend where the current still catches. You told me the drop is stronger there." That was not the same as hope, but it was close. They started before sunrise. The work was ugly, heavy, slow. Elias measured brace points with the patient's injury had beaten into him. Lynn stripped boards from a ruined chicken run, sorted usable nails, sealed barrel seams with pitch, and lashed joints tight enough to survive weather and bad luck. By noon, they were filthy. By afternoon, they were arguing. "That board is too high," Elias snapped. "It is too high for you to reach," Lynn snapped back. "Not too high for the wheel." The words landed wrong. He went still. "All right," he said flatly. "You can finish it your way." He turned too fast. The cane skidded. He nearly went down. Lynn caught his arm before he hit the bank. For one humiliating second, his full weight dropped into her grip. He pulled back the instant he found his footing, not because he was angry, because he had been seen. "I did not mean that," Lynn said. "Yes, you did." "No. I meant I am tired. I meant I am frightened. I meant if this fails, they will say they were right." He stared at the creek. "They already say that." "And you think I do not hear them?" Now he looked at her. She was breathing hard, eyes bright, mud on her sleeves, hair loosening at the temples. "They look at you and see a broken man," she said. "They look at me and see a woman who should be grateful someone took her in. Every time something dies in that field, they think the answer is already written. I do not want to become proof for them." The creek moved beside them. A loose chain tapped wood. Nothing else. Then Elias lowered himself onto a stump. "You think I wanted this marriage because I needed help?" She held his gaze. "Didn't you?" He laughed once, sharp, bitter. "I agreed because the bank looked at my leg before it looked at my books, because every offer of help came tied to ownership. They didn't send you here to save me. They sent you because they thought 2 leftovers might make 1 acceptable future." That truth hit clean. Lynn sat across from him on the bank. "My uncle used to say people love duty," she said, "because it lets them call control kindness. I think your uncle was smarter than most of this county." A beat. Then, quieter now, Elias said, "I never wanted a wife who had to be persuaded." Lynn answered, "I never wanted a husband chosen by a ledger." At last he tapped the half-built wheel with the end of his cane. "Well, since both of us were insulted by committee, we may as well make this thing work." They finished at sunset. The wheel turned badly at first, then crookedly, then with stubborn rhythm. Water lifted by inches into the first barrel and spilled through a narrow plank chute toward the field. Not enough for abundance, enough for hope. Lynn watched the stream catch the light. "We did that." Elias looked at the moving water, then at her. Together. By the next afternoon, the whole town had heard that Elias Hart and his Chinese bride were keeping dead ground alive with scrap lumber and mule chain. Gossip changed shape when success interrupted it. Men who once mocked Elias came to inspect his measurements. Women who once went silent around Lynn noticed the precision of her mending, the order of her storeroom, the herb bundles drying by the porch. Respect did not arrive as apology. It arrived disguised as practicality, but it arrived. That should have been enough. It wasn't, because usefulness is not the same thing as belonging. The real test came at Founder's Day. Dust Hollow gathered under canvas near the church lot with stew, pies, smoked meat, preserves, cornbread. Enough food to pretend everybody liked each other. Lynn brought braised greens with sesame and vinegar, hand-cut noodles adapted from whatever frontier ingredients she could actually find, sweet cakes built from molasses, spice, and patience. Elias loaded the dishes himself. "You do not have to prove anything," he told her. "This is not proof," she said. "It is introduction." When they arrived, conversation dipped. Not as sharply as before, still enough to feel. They set down the food, and for one long minute, nobody moved. Then old Mrs. Mercer stepped forward and asked for the greens. Not warmly, just plainly. She took one bite, then another. "Well," she said, loud enough for everybody to hear, "that is better than half this table deserves." The tension cracked. Someone asked about the seasoning. Someone else asked about the noodles. A ranch hand asked Elias if the creek wheel could be adapted to a trough line. Children came back for sweet cakes with sticky fingers and no respect at all for prejudice. The evening did not heal the town. Towns do not change that neatly. But the marriage stopped being a sideshow. For the first time, it became a household people had to reckon with honestly. On the ride home, the sky burned copper behind the hills. "They still stare," Lynn said. Yes. "They still talk." Yes. "It hurts less." Elias let the wagon roll a few yards before answering. "That might be because they are finally talking to the right people." Back at the ranch, the house smelled of horse leather, dry wood, and the ginger she had toasted before dawn. On the table lay a ledger, a spool of thread, a horseshoe nail, and one of Lynn's paper patterns weighed flat with a stone. To anyone else, it was clutter. To them, it was a map. After a long silence, Elias asked, "Do you still think this was a cage?" She watched moonlight drag silver over the ditch line. "Sometimes," she said, "but not because of you." That answer cost her something. He respected it more for that. Then she asked, "Do you still think I was sent here as charity?" He looked out at the dark fields they had kept alive. "No, I think whoever arranged this underestimated both of us." Summer loosened. The wheel kept turning. The bean rows recovered enough to matter. Elias secured a fair sale on 2 young mares. Lynn began taking sewing work from town, first secretly, then openly. Pain did not vanish. Money did not suddenly flood in. Prejudice did not evaporate because one season went well. But dignity returned in pieces large enough to hold. One evening, Elias looked up from the ledger and asked, "What would you call it?" Lynn glanced up from her sewing. "Call what?" "This place," he said, "if it was ours on purpose." Now the question was no longer about survival. It was about choice. She set down the needle. "Hart and Tran," she said, "so no one can mistake who built it." He repeated it slowly. Hart and Tran. Then he laughed under his breath. Dust Hollow will hate that. Dust Hollow can learn. He looked at her then, really looked. At the woman forced into his life by men who thought in ledgers. The woman who had argued with him at the creek, repaired his shirts, changed his kitchen, steadied his body without insulting his pride, and turned survival into partnership before either of them dared name it. "I would like that," he said. Outside, the wheel kept turning. Inside, the lamp burned warm over cloth, paper, and figures that finally tilted toward possibility. The town had come to watch a limping horse trader marry a Chinese widow no one understood. They expected pity at best, failure at worst. What they got instead was this: two people treated like damaged goods, becoming harder to break than anyone around them. A marriage arranged for convenience, earning its own meaning. A life built by hand, at the creek, at the table, in the field, and in the daily stubborn choice to stop living by other people's verdicts. By autumn, nobody pointed at the Hart Ranch because it was strange. They pointed because it was working. And when they did, they had to say both names.